People living in Japan, what are your stories about neckbeards that have visited your country?
She wasn't a neckbeard, she was a 16-year-old girl from Montana on a 1-year Rotary scholarship in a nearby town. She loved Inuyasha. She didn't fit into her small Montana town, she had felt lonely and isolated. She came to Japan, thinking that everyone would love manga and anime, that everyone loved Inuyasha in particular, and that she would be instantly understood, accepted, and loved. It might have all worked out if she'd been sent to a larger city, a place with the infrastructure to support gatherings of manga/anime fans, and a way to get there. But there she was, stuck in the countryside, attending a second-rate high school, where the students were put off by her enthusiasm for things they had outgrown. She was depressed and angry. Her host family wanted me to help. I had lived there for 5 years. I had a pretty good understanding of the language and culture, and I did want to help, but she didn't want help. She wanted everything around her to change in order to fit her idea of what Japan should be like. She prized her Montana dream of Japan over the reality of Japan. I met with her a couple of times, and then she moved to a different host home and we lost touch. I hope she ended up choosing to accept the Japan that was, rather than rejecting it in favor of her fantasies.
There's something about teenage girls in rural Montana, and them being obsessed with Inuyasha. The more rural the town, the greater the number Inuyasha fangirls.
I got to observe an opposite version of this. My little sister's class had a girl from Japan for 1 year. She didn't seem miserable, but when I met her I apologized that she had been sent there. She was just like, yeah, this is not what I expected. Poor kid got to experience the fine dining of MT Dew and gas station nachos.
She sounds like a lot of the girls I met doing speech and debate during high school in Montana.
While visiting Japan, I saw a skinny kid wearing an AJO sweatshirt on the subway with his parents. For those not in the know, AJO is the look of girls mid-orgasm giving a happy, generally cross-eyed euphoria-like facial expression. So this sweatshirt is plastered with different girls giving this look. I saw quite a few other people on the train giving this kid disgusted looks. Edit, someone found it or something similar. It looks like this sweatshirt. Edit 2, changed link to image so your Amazon history isn't impacted by this.
Dude, we had a kid at high school who would wear a full tracksuit of that stuff, sweatshirt and sweatpants. I don't know why administration never said anything to him. Clearly something was not right there, though he wasn't in any special education programs.
Boomers just don't know what a higo is, it's just not sexual, until you point it out to them.
Now I'll never be able to unsee that. The thing is, when something is not seen as sexual, then it's also not seen with malice. I would see those drawings every now and then and think none of it. I just thought those were pictures of girls making funny/silly faces.
Oh no.
LMAO.
Yeah, IDKY if it looks edgy or something, but it always really weirds me out. Also WTF parents. I hung out with other foreigners in Osaka via some people I met through Reddit that knew people who were all English teachers. I only met one neckbeard during my solo trip, and he was trying to build his own mini home on some land off the coast or something in Japan. IDK how, since I heard buying land is next to impossible. He tried hitting on me in my native language. We're both from the US. I got weirded out and left. Then he tried to white knight one of my friends pretty aggressively at a club later that night, and went on a drunk rant at her about her leading him on in front of all our friends at 4 a.m.
I discussed the parents with my wife and I just don't know. Like, on one hand it's not like you can't tell what that kind of clothes is about. On the other hand, they're really trying to engage their son who is clearly not fitting in, lashing out and being edgy in their teenage years. You could try laying the hammer down or try to engage like they have paying for a trip to Japan and see if it gets them to have a wake-up call. Really, I just don't envy them and the decisions you make at this point. I may not agree with all of the choices, but man, they are trying.
Even when I was visiting, I saw tourists really screw up the social etiquette. Not in a bad way, but way too formal in everyday situations. not really following what the locals were doing. Things like very deep bows for completing a transaction at 7 to 11. So nothing bad, just funny to watch.
Honestly, it's pretty hard to know what to do. If the maid in the hotel bows, what kind of bow do you do back? If any? Some things you can't really be taught easily, and I tried to wing it. I just hope everyone realized I was trying my best.
Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't foreigners expected to give a bow with just their head?
That's what I did while I lived there. It's kind of like an aggressive head nod of agreement.
Stay long enough and you find yourself doing the mini bow to say thanks to someone for moving to let you off the train, to their back lol.
I was only there like 3 weeks and I was bowing at the US custom agents on my way home instinctively like an idiot.
I said hedge for a good week or two after leaving Sweden. Was only there for 6 months, but it became an automatic greeting by the time I left. I remember the day I landed, the customs agent said hedge and I, confusingly, say hey. She says hedge again to indicate I should say hedge twice, and I looked at her with concern and said, hey, lol.
When I came back to the US from studying abroad in Germany, I would say Entschuldigung anytime I got in someone's way or bumped into them for about a week.
That's funny, I'm a German and always say sorry when that happens, laughing face.
Normally, if you're not sure, a quick half bow is acceptable. Like the other guy said, just a nod is okay for most situations.
I just hope everyone realized I was trying my best. Based on my experiences in Japan, I would guess they genuinely and deeply appreciated any effort you made to respect their culture, whether you got it right or not.
Honestly though, I feel like being way too formal is better than being not formal enough. Obviously, it does look rather silly, but maybe in an endearing way. Even in America, if someone new came to my house and called me Ms. Ikis, it's a lot easier to tell them, oh, don't be so stiff. Call me just dude than to try to make someone be more polite.
Please, Mr. GHHHHH was my father. Call me error.
Most of the comments on here already said it better than me. The tourist trap districts are what, as the name suggests, attract all of the tourists. The weebs/neckbeards go to Akihabara, the fashion students go to Harajuku. Huge letdown, by the way, and the social media tourists flock to Shinjuku because of all the red light district places that were featured on BuzzFeed. I don't really have any stories about anyone in particular. I saw plenty of cringy tourists and people making fools of themselves, especially if it was for the sake of Instagram or YouTube. They'll take up the entire two-way sidewalk in those cases. But for the most part, it was generally limited to those areas. You go to any real tourist destination in Japan, and it will almost entirely consist of Japanese people. The country has a lot of wonderful places that are not really advertised to foreigners unless you dig for them. Edit. I hate updating comments since Reddit flips anytime it happens, but I'm getting a lot of the same questions, and I can't respond to everyone, so I'll bite. Tokyo is great, but there are a lot of places to visit beyond it. Nagasaki, Miyajima, Hiroshima, Osaka, Kyoto, Kamakura, list goes on. Lots of hiking trails, shrines, museums, and just straight up cool stuff to see. Depends on what you're looking for, but I'd recommend doing some research and looking into those first. Many of them can be reached by the bullet train, which is your friend. Ueno is a part of Tokyo that I recommend to everyone, as it offers a little bit of everything and has a nice park and a zoo. Not meaning to offend anyone if my comment is brash, but I want to save you a disappointing experience or costly one if I can. Akihabara is fun for a day or so, but I wouldn't spend a week there. You could kill 3 birds with 1 stone and go to Akiba, Harajuku, and Shinjuku in one afternoon if you truly want to. I don't discourage going to those places, but it's easy to get caught up in them and forget that the country has more to offer. Just do your research and you'll get an idea on what might be good for you. Also, see a baseball game. They're fun.
Care to elaborate on the real destinations in Japan? ASU said, it's hard unless I dig for it, but I've done a fair amount of digging, and I still can't really find what would really be the authentic tourist experience. My wife and I will still go to Shinjuku if only for the Hachiko dog, because we love that story, but other than that, I'm at a loss besides the tourist traps.
Many cities outside of Tokyo are worth the visit, and are easy to get to thanks to the bullet train. For historical significance, Kyoto is great but can be crowded, especially during Golden Week. I think Hiroshima was also really nice and peaceful, and it had Miyajima nearby, which was wonderful and one of my favorite trips, awesome food, deer and great mountain to climb. I never got to visit Okinawa, a bit more out of the way, but I've heard only good things about its beaches. They also have one of the only aquariums with a whale shark, which is a big sell if you want to see one of those. Also, if you are in a city, I recommend looking into catching a baseball game. Japanese baseball is awesome and kind of a throwback to how American baseball was in the 50s.
Hiroshima is perhaps my favorite city in Japan, maybe Kobe. Despite the history of the place, the nightlife is great, it's beautiful even by Japan standards, and that far south everyone's a bit more chill. Also hard agree on Harajuku, the most overrated area of Tokyo. I only go there for the line shop, then go to Ebisu for blackouts.
Chiming in as a pre-pandemic, somewhat frequent tourist to Japan, I find Akihabara quite nice to spend a couple of days going around and watching the ebb and flow of people, and besides the big electronics stores there's earphones, which is a haven for all audio-related gear. There's something alluring about all that mess, relatively speaking, but it does get tiring after a while. Getting stuck there during a typhoon was quite an eerie experience with everything closed and no one around. But for actual chill on an urban environment, I can't recommend Himeji enough. It is very well connected to many other major cities, especially Osaka and Kyoto, while being way more affordable for lodging, and obviously has an amazing castle, and a lot of places to eat and drink.
What kind of person am I, who only wants to go to Japan, so I can go nature hiking in the mountain trails, and visit mountain temples? I just want to be in nature, and see beautiful things built in out-of-the-way places where people usually don't go.
I just want to go and eat all the food while pointedly ignoring anyone's reactions to surprising quantities I put away due to American.
The trick is to eat normal Japanese portions, but at multiple restaurants in a row.
Fuck that. I want to see the fear and disgust in their faces as I pack down a 3,000-calorie lunch and ask for dessert in terrible broken Japanese.
Watashi wa cheesecake desu.
Cheesecakey.
Nanny.
The vast majority will come over and geek out for a week in specific entertainment districts and tourist traps, which is pretty much live and let live for me. Some neckbeard do end up moving to Japan though, and they definitely exist in FOB expat/English teacher circles. That being said, there aren't really any stories that I know of that are particularly noteworthy. Most of them come here, go through culture shock and realize that Japan isn't all it was cracked up to be, and go home once they have had their fill. Some get stuck in bad marriages/have kids and end up staying in low-paying English teaching jobs for the rest of their lives, since they have no other marketable skills/career options, and that lot is pretty sad. A small but notable percentage will break down because of the lack of a social support system/poor mental health care, which is always sad to see as well.
Most of them come here, go through culture shock and realize that Japan isn't all it was cracked up to be, and go home once they have had their fill. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. People tend to focus on the positives of another culture, while focusing on the negatives of their own culture. Then they travel to this other culture and can't ignore the negative parts anymore, and the culture shock hits them hard and brings back reality. My cousin lived in England for a while, and he basically said you were exchanging your current cultural problems with a different set of cultural problems.
Japan specifically have this issue that a lot of people going there were hooked on their cultural exports, failing to realize that the stuff that goes into anime and manga practically goes there because it's not like day-to-day life at all.
It's the Western equivalent of moving to LA to be a glamorous movie star. Our escapist pop culture is by definition not the day-to-day experience. Hell, even our glamorous movie stars aren't living like glamorous movie stars with all the sexual harassment, corruption, crazy diets, repetitive interviews, lack of privacy and struggle to remain relevant longer than 5 years. My point is, everyone is eating shit and the only way out is to solve the problems in the life you have, and then move on to solving bigger problems that will give you more of what you want. Buying into escapism is just a recipe for new problems you barely even understand.
I've been listening to a lot of interviews from North Korean defectors lately. One girl defected because she had seen a lot of K-dramas and wanted the freedom to live her life like a K-drama. She said it was a culture shock when she got to South Korea to see that real life isn't at all like the K-dramas. Obviously she still liked the culture better than NK, so she stayed, but it wasn't what she was expecting. That's similar to your moving to Hollywood anecdote, but with a happy ending, I suppose.
I'd argue anything is probably an upgrade to North Korea. At least until the day it stops being a dystopian dictatorship.
I totally agree with your cousin. I always tell people when you make a jump like this you take all your baggage with you, live alone, and then pile on all the difficulties of learning to live in a different culture. And even if you can manage all that, chances are that you still can't even read a newspaper.
Heck, I even had cultural issues living in the US, from Canada and England. That was a better fit in some ways. The social etiquette/demeanor felt more similar, but harder in others, not really understanding class, education, accents, etc., and the workplace felt more hierarchical and formalized there than here, where ideas seem to be more welcome.
The fact that the UK still has a very entrenched class system boggles my mind. Edit, ITT, Americans saying yeah I moved here, and it's strange, and British people saying nah you too.
Japan was an awesome place to live, but I don't know if I could stay there permanently. It would really depend on the job and location. The mentality is literally work all the time. There are people eligible to retire who don't retire because they feel society will look down on them if they do. The suicide rate is astronomical. There were a ton of perks to living there, but again, it would really depend on the situation if I was offered to go back permanently. Also, don't fall for the tourist traps if you're in Tokyo. There are better places for merch and games than Akihabara. Harajuku sucks. Just avoid that one. And Shinjuku is fun, but a bit lacking and expensive compared to districts like Ueno.
I'll always remember about 15 years ago I was traveling through Europe when an older Japanese man asked if he could practice speaking English with me. I learned that his job was to coach his fellow countrymen on how to be retired, as the transition is so jarring for many it was ruining lives. It blew my mind, but makes sense based on what I know of the culture there.
I'll always remember about 15 years ago I was traveling through Europe when an older Japanese man asked if he could practice speaking English with me. I was in Tokyo in 2016 and happened to be around during the Sanya festival. While following the crowds in Mikashi, an older Japanese man wanted to practice his English and used it to explain the festival to me, which was super nice. At the end of the route the Mikashi follow was all the standard booths with food and games. I got chatting with another older Japanese man who was proud to be able to hammer off all the Canadian provinces, territories, and capital cities of each to me.
We probably need this in the US as well. I know several recently retired people who just sit in their house all day watching cable news, which is literal poison at this point.
There's been a saying in the USA for a long time: don't stop moving when you retire, or you'll stop moving forever. You have to have something to do in retirement to be healthy.
Bear Bryant was considered the greatest American football coach ever during his life. He was one of the overall greatest American football coaches in general. After his last game he was asked what he'd do during retirement. He replied probably croak in a week. To his credit he lasted 4 weeks.
It can be also seen in a literal way. In Germany we say, wer rastet, der rostet, equals, the one who makes a break for too long will become rusty, and this isn't specifically for older people, but for people who don't do sports as well. Old people back in the days stopped moving at some point and didn't do any sports. New research found out that they are actually capable of doing more, like running or other sports, and it can make their lives longer if done properly.
The one who rests, rusts. Smiley face.
I love you for that one. I couldn't come up with a proper translation in that short amount of time. Laughing face.
When little Timmy reached the age and found the time to rest, I'll make myself a noble sage. At last, the lad expressed, I'll spend my nights and days in sleep. I'll live and learn to be. And when my time is mine to keep, I'll use it all for me. I'll only stir for moments small. I'll barely move, he cried. But soon he didn't move at all. And Timmy fucking died.
This might be a generational thing. I am from Eastern Europe and pretty much all the grandparents and the boomer generation is like that. They only know how to work. Those that have livestock take care of it, those who have farms and fields work that, those who don't make a garden and work there. Some find work on the side. It's not uncommon to see 80-year-old grannies that can barely walk complaining how their back/hips hurt and then immediately plow half an acre field by hand with a hoe. Then complain more, then repeat.
It's a cultural thing. The notion of elderly people going to be home by themselves when they're too old to work is a very modern Western notion that has only existed for 70 years or so. For the previous few thousands of years of human history, when someone became elderly, they lived with their families helping raise children and providing advice to the able-bodied adults in the family and wisdom to children. It's not normal for humans to just quit, even if they're too old to do conventional work. Mind has to stay occupied.
I've been living here for a year and a half and I am thinking the day will probably come when I go back to America. My schools are working me really hard before the school year ends, and I'm totally exhausted. I've put in 4 hours of surprise overtime this week, and it looks like I'll be putting in another 3 hours next week. On the other hand, I spent most of today signing yearbooks from graduating students who really wanted my signature, so it's nice to know that I've had some impact in their lives. I like doing what I do now, but I don't want to do it forever.
Since this is the #1 comment and there are lots of replies, I doubt anyone will see this, but I want to say that this is an incredibly accurate assessment. The expat community in Japan can be very cliquey and judgmental. They will run you down if you do anything touristy or have any actual enthusiasm for being there. Generally, expats tend to be pretty brutal. That's why I like this comment so much. It is live and let live. If you are in Japan long enough, you will see all types of people. In my experience, most of the otaku types burn out really quickly and go home disappointed. They go in expecting robots and anime girls and find tired people who work a lot and way more pollution than you would think. Some people do get stuck in bad marriages. A cross-cultural marriage is especially difficult. Even if one of you is totally fluent in the other's language, there are still different expectations and misunderstandings are common. If you have kids and your residency depends upon your marital status, it is easy to get trapped. Also, it doesn't get better when you relocate your family to your home country either, it just ramps up pressure on your Japanese partner. I got sidetracked but just wanted to say again what a great, thoughtful post this is.
Sounds like how it was teaching English in Chile. Most of the teachers only hung out with each other, didn't have any Chilean friends except when some rich student would invite them out. They'd spend all weekend having parties that only other expats would come to, they did tons of drugs, and they were all sleeping with each other. After the first month of working there, I had more culture shock from how the expats were living than by Chilean culture itself, which was quite easy to adapt to.
I went on a 2-week vacation to Japan a few years ago. Obviously, I visited the hotspots like Akihabara and Harajuku. I didn't really see anyone that fit the traditional white neckbeard description, but one of the top recommendations on TripAdvisor was a maid cafe in Akihabara, so we decided to check it out. We weren't the only tourists there was another American couple that looked just as weirded out as we were. The place had no windows, the food was terrible and overpriced, and the maids honestly didn't spend much time around us. The creepy thing was that the place was filled with creepy-looking, much older men that looked like they hung out there all day. At one point we saw one of them go into a back room with one of the maids for quite a while. Apparently if you bought an $80 bottle of wine you could cuddle with one of the maids. I don't know how old these girls were, but I got the impression that they were high school students.
Yeah, most Japanese high schools wouldn't let a student work at a maid cafe, so the other commenter is right that they're mostly 18 plus. And I'm not surprised they didn't give you much attention, since they knew you wouldn't be regulars.
Yep, that's Japan.
No. Maids are normally 18 plus, so college students doing it as part-time mostly. Many are also manga culture fans. I never heard/seen about backrooms, but different styles of maid cafes exist. And the food in some maid cafes is amazing. There are definitely creepy customers though. Fun experiences, but most Japanese people never go to a maid cafe in their live. So a somewhat special form of entertainment for people in big cities. My wife also enjoys them though.
I have a friend who I met online through anime that lives in Japan and works at one of the manga shops around Akihabara. According to him, lots of English-speaking foreigners come in and make a huge obnoxious deal about the lolicon section in the shop. Like he pretty much expects it at this point. If he sees someone non-Asian come in, that they will go straight to that area and start snickering and sneaking pictures with their group. Technically photography isn't allowed, but he doesn't like confronting them about it after a few bad experiences, so he just pretends not to notice. He still groans about the "Don't Loot the Lowly Dragon" memes a few years ago, since they always had kana books on display due to popularity, and it was like a giant beacon to tourists to be obnoxious. They also bought those books in particular more than any Japanese. The Japanese customers mask up and say nothing. Just a minor thing I've learned.
When I lived in Japan in the 1990s, my Japanese friend took me to a condom kiosk in Tokyo, which was supposed to be shocking and edgy. It just had lots of different types of condoms in novelty colors, which was cool, but to me it wasn't shocking. Some of the magazines and manga sold in convenience stores, however.
I remember seeing a cigarette vending machine on the side of the road once. That was pretty shocking, just the idea that any kid could just buy cigarettes without an adult even having to talk to them.
Just a minor thing I've learned. _
Well, why is there a lolicon section?
Supply and demand.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
If it didn't sell, they wouldn't have. Joe Public has a taste, and faceless publishers gonna get money from them with it.
I lived in Japan for a year with my sister in 2008. I was on a working holiday visa. I was supposed to work only part-time, but part-time to them was 40 hours a week. I had a fun job though. I worked in a little bakery in Nishiazabu. I am a trained pastry chef. Minimum wage was $10. LOL. So I didn't make a lot of money, but it was enough for some fun trips with my sister. And the people who owned the bakery were very kind in letting me take some time off to experience Japan. I never came across any sketchy or weird tourists. In fact, I don't recall seeing many. I actually had a wonderful experience. I'm so happy I went. I went back to visit in 2018, and I can tell you there were like a bazillion more tourists. I also went to more of the tourist-y places, because I went with friends who had never been. Though I recall going to Enoshima and seeing like no tourists. I went to Harajuku for some shopping by myself, and I went to go have lunch, and the restaurant was filled with tourists. Some of them were incredibly rude as well. Getting annoyed at the poor waitress because she didn't understand what they were asking for. Talking really slow and really loud. Like that was going to help. Then loudly complaining from their table after she left. I think she was glad that I was able to order my food in Japanese. She gave me a big smile. My Japanese is very, very basic. But I spoke with confidence, so that probably helped, tongue sticking out. TDLR, 2008, no problem with tourists. 2018, lots of tourists, but only in the tourist Y areas.
Nothing irks me more than people going to a country where English isn't native, and then getting annoyed that people don't speak English.
Some douchey British guy kept talking about all the women he's been with and calling women different slurs. Apparently he had been known for treating women like shit while in Japan. I was the only girl in the group and he said I was offended because I was American. My Japanese friends agreed that he was a douche. Not exactly a neckbeard but a total creep all the same.
This is why a better question would be all Asian countries and their experience with creepy westerns. I love Thailand and SE Asia in general, but man, I can't get over seeing some of the creepy white dudes.
When I was in Saigon many moons ago, the many old white men with young Vietnamese women was one of the most disturbing things I've seen. Especially since many of these men were of war age.
TW, violence against women/murder. Please read at your own discretion. I lived in Osaka for 4 years, and at the end I only hung around foreigners, but I didn't need too many neckbeards. The worst experience with a tourist wasn't a neckbeard per se, but a man obsessed with Japan and especially Japanese women. It was around my 24th birthday, and I was showing my friend visiting from home how weird Tinder can be in Japan, found someone whose pictures were that weird anime girl costume. Well, I swiped right on this American guy cause he kinda looked like a dick, and I was right. A few messages and he started pestering me to meet up at his hotel. I kept saying no, but he kept at it, while saying things like how he'd rather be with a Japanese girl, and how he hooked up with one 30 minutes earlier. I told him sure, I'd meet up, but I never went. A week later I got an email from the Hyogo police asking about a guy whose name was similar, but different to the asshole. I looked it up, and it turns out her decapitated, dismembered, and threw his Japanese Tinder date's body in the woods. The names were different, but I'm 99% sure it's him because of the photos. If I remember correctly, he was found with her head in a bag or box on his person. One article, another article. Here's the email and the translation. I have his Tinder pictures on my old phone. Hell, I even saved the conversation. Edit, thank you all for your kind words and awards, especially the hugs, those are really sweet. But please, save your money, I really appreciate them.
Wow, and he only got 8 years. https://ny-post.com/2019/New-York-man-gets-8-years-for-body-parts-across-Japan. Kondo's father told reporters that the 8-year sentence is too light and the truth remains unknown, according to Japan Today.
He decapitated and dismembered her. It should have been a much stronger sentence. I'm not for the death penalty, but Japan still hangs criminals.
Goddamn. A co-worker here in Tokyo does prison outreach with his church. He only talks to non-violent criminals. 2 guys got 8 years or more for drug running, they had marijuana only. Goddamn priorities here sometimes.
WTF. Edit, TFW, just 3 letters are enough to get 2K upvotes LMAO.
I laugh at the situation cause I was so close to possibly meeting a murderer, but it's so depressing that this poor woman lost her life to this horrible man. I am glad he was convicted, as I've heard Japan can be quite lenient on white men.
Not just meeting a murderer. If you had met him, you would be dead, fam.
Damn, this is messed up. Poor girl. I've never heard this story, lived in Hyogo as well.